She traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger, only to be publicly humiliated and abandoned on a dusty train platform. With just $47, no family, and an entire town watching her fail, Clara had nowhere to go. But what happened next? A quiet rancher offered her shelter for one night, and then a wounded fugitive stumbled through their door, bleeding and hunted by dangerous men. Suddenly, Clara found herself trapped in a lie, pretending to be a married woman to protect a man she barely knew, while killers circled closer every day. Would this desperate deception destroy her, or lead her to something she never expected to find? What you'll discover in this story: sometimes our greatest heartbreaks are actually redirections. Clara's rejection wasn't the end. It was the beginning of finding real love, true partnership, and the courage she never knew she had. This is a story about how choosing kindness in dark moments can transform your entire life. If stories like this speak to your heart, tap that like button and leave a comment telling me, have you ever had a rejection that turned into your greatest blessing? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another story that reminds us why hope is always worth holding on to. The train whistle sliced through the afternoon heat, announcing its arrival at a place that felt more like a temporary camp than a town. Clara Whitmore pressed a hand to the window, the rattle of the train shaking her to her bones. Outside, Wyoming stretched on forever. Just brown grass, a few trees, and buildings that looked like they were thrown together in a hurry. She smoothed the front of her dress, a heavy wool that made sense back in Philadelphia but was a mistake out here. The letter in her pocket was soft from being read over and over. It promised partnership with a man of character and strength, Harlan Crow. Those words had been her anchor for 6 long days on the rails. She held on to them when other passengers gave her knowing looks, and when she had to sleep sitting up in a train station because she could not afford a hotel. The train screeched to a halt. Clara grabbed her bag. Inside was everything she had left in the world: 3 dresses, her mother's silver hairbrush, a Bible, and the $47 she had earned from 2 years of sewing. The conductor, a tired-eyed man, appeared beside her. "This is it, miss. You certain about this?" "I'm certain," she lied, because the truth was too heavy. He nodded slowly. "This is a rough town. You have someone meeting you?" "Yes," she said, lifting her chin, trying to look confident. He helped her down the steps, and suddenly she was standing on a dusty platform, the sun beating down on her. The platform was full of rough-looking men in denim and canvas. A few women stood off to the side, their dresses faded and worn. Every single one of them turned to stare at her. Clara searched the crowd for a tall man with brown hair, the one described in the letter. She saw him standing near the station house, arms crossed, watching her. A knot formed in her stomach. She had seen that look before in the eyes of men who had already made up their minds about a woman. Still, she walked right toward him, her boots clicking on the planks, her bag feeling heavier with every step. The whispers in the crowd died down. "Mr. Crow," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He looked her up and down, slow and careful, and his expression turned cold. "You must be the one from Philadelphia, Clara Whitmore." She set her bag down and offered her hand the way a proper lady should. He just ignored it. "You failed to mention you were so—" He waved a hand toward her face and her dress. "Refined." The word hung in the air like an insult. The whispers started up again. "I can work," she said, her voice pleading. "I am stronger than I look." "You look like you would break the first time you had to haul water from the creek," he said, glancing at the watching crowd. "Or pluck a chicken." Heat rose in her cheeks, but she stood tall. "I have done hard work my whole life. I can learn." "Can you learn to fit in?" he asked, his voice low enough for only those nearby to hear. "This is not some Philadelphia tea party. The women out here work until their hands bleed." She wore gloves not for show, but because they were the only pair she owned. Telling him that would only make her seem weaker. "You are not prepared for anything," he said, picking up her bag and dropping it with a thud. "You still have that $47 you wrote about?" The question felt like a violation, but she nodded. "Good. You will need it for a ticket back home." He turned to the crowd then. "My apologies, Miss Whitmore, but this is not going to work. I need a partner, not a porcelain doll." The words hit her hard. She could feel the town's curiosity turning into pity. "Mr. Crow, please," she begged. "I traveled for 6 days. I sold everything. I have nowhere else to go." "That is not my problem," he said, his voice flat. "I made a mistake. I should have been clearer. Just give me a chance." But he was already walking away, not even turning around when she called his name one last time. The crowd slowly broke apart, their free show over. Clara stood there, frozen, with her bag at her feet, and the sun beating down. A woman in a faded yellow dress paused. "The hotel is 2 blocks that way," she said gently. "But they are not hiring. Nobody is." "Thank you," Clara whispered. The woman hesitated. "You have family back east?" "No." The woman just shook her head and walked away, her children following her, all of them looking back at the lonely woman on the platform. Clara finally picked up her bag. Her hands were shaking, but she made herself walk off that platform and down the dusty main street. The Territorial Hotel had paint peeling from its walls. Clara pushed open the door and walked into a dim room that smelled like old smoke and stale coffee. A heavy-set man behind the counter looked up from a book. "Can I help you?" he asked, his eyes sizing her up. "I'm looking for any kind of work, cleaning, laundry, cooking." "Not hiring," he said, and looked back down. "I am a very hard worker. I just need a room and meals." "I said we are not hiring." This time he did not even bother to look up. "You are not the right type, anyway." She stared at him, confused. "I don't understand." "You are the one Harlan Crow sent packing, are not you?" he said, finally meeting her gaze. "Word gets around fast. We do not need that kind of trouble here." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that follows a woman a man has publicly rejected," he said plainly. "It causes talk, it causes fights. I do not need it. I am just looking for a job." "Try the next town over," he said, closing his book with a loud thump. "Or better yet, head back east where you belong." Clara turned and walked back out into the blistering heat, her hope finally starting to crumble. The brutal sun had driven everyone to shade. Clara walked from door to door, but the answer was always no. The general store was not hiring. The dress shop owner gave her one look and refused. The man at the stable actually laughed. As the sky turned gold, she knew every business had turned her away. She wound up behind the cattle yards, the air heavy with dust. She sat on the water trough, her bag at her feet. This was it. 6 days of travel, 2 years of saving, all for nothing. With only $47, she was stuck. She buried her face in her hands, trying to cry quietly. A shadow fell across her, and she looked up, startled. A tall, lean man stood there watching her with unreadable eyes. His voice was low, meant not to spook her. "I did not mean to startle you," he said. Clara wiped at her face with her gloves, trying to regain some dignity. "I am fine. I will move on." He stopped her. "You are the woman from the train." It was not a question. "I heard what Harlan did. That was not right." She insisted it did not matter. "It does," he replied, then asked directly, "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Surprised, she told him the truth. "No?" He nodded as if he knew. "Have you eaten?" She looked into his eyes, trying to understand his purpose. "No," she finally admitted. "Okay," he said, picking up her bag. "Come on." "Where to?" she asked, her voice wary. "My place. It is not fancy, but it is warm and dry. You can have a meal and a real bed. We can sort things out in the morning." Clara stood slowly, her mind full of warnings about strange men. "I do not know your name." "Eli Mercer." He held out his hand, the very greeting Harlan had rejected. "I have a ranch about 2 miles east." She took his hand. "Why are you helping me?" "Because nobody else is going to," he said, simple as that. "And I know what it is like to be on the outside." Every rule told her to run, but the rules had failed her completely. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Thank you." He helped her onto his simple wagon, and they rode out of town in silence. The prairie opened up under a sky bigger than she could imagine. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It has its moments," Eli agreed, "but it is a hard land." The quiet that followed felt different, more peaceful. He looked to be around 30, a man worn by work, not malice. "You do not have to do this," she said. "I know." "I cannot pay you." "I am not asking for payment," he replied. "Then what do you want from me?" The question hung in the quiet air. The only sounds were the creaking wagon and the horse's steady steps. "Nothing," he said at last. "You can stay the night. Get your wits about you. Tomorrow is a new day. That is all." She wanted so badly to believe in his kindness. Soon a small log cabin appeared. It was sturdy and well kept, with a barn nearby. He stopped the wagon and helped her down. Inside, the cabin was simple and clean. One room held a table, a stove, and a few books. It was a place of quiet order. The place was scrubbed clean, the way a person gets when they live alone with too much time on their hands. Eli put her bag down and went right to the stove. The coals were still warm. He said, "It will not take long to heat up some stew. You can sit. You have had a hard go of it." She took the chair he pointed to, mostly because her legs felt like they might give out. Eli moved about the kitchen with a quiet purpose, feeding kindling to the fire and pumping water. He grabbed a pot and ladled stew into it from a bigger one. He asked, "Coffee or water?" "Water is fine," she said. He poured a cup and set it before her. The water was cold and clean, and she realized how thirsty she was. Without turning, he said, "The outhouse is out back. There is a wash basin on the porch. Soap and towels are in the box." Grateful for something to do, Clara went outside. The evening air had turned cool. She found the basin and the hard yellow lye soap. The water was shockingly cold, but she washed the dust and dried tears from her face. When she returned, the smell of warm beef and onion stew filled the small cabin. Eli had set bowls on the table. He nodded for her to sit and served her a bowl before taking his own. They ate in a heavy silence. The food was simple but good, and she felt a warmth spread through her, chasing away some of the chill from her soul. "This is very good," she finally said. "It is just stew." He almost smiled. They finished, and Eli gathered the bowls. "You can take the bedroom," he said, nodding toward a door. "I will sleep out here. I cannot take your bed." He waved off her protest. "It is already settled." She was too tired to argue. Eli brought her bag into the small room and set it on a chair. The room was simple, holding just a bed with a faded quilt, a chair, and a washstand. "I will be right outside," he said from the doorway. "You are safe here." He closed the door, leaving her in the soft lamplight. For the first time all day, she felt a flicker of safety. She changed and lay down, her mind racing. Outside, she could hear the quiet sounds of Eli settling in, the creak of a chair, the soft murmur of his voice. Against all odds, she fell asleep. Sunlight woke her. For a moment she was lost, and then yesterday came crashing back. Her heart pounded. Had he left her? Was this a trap? Then she saw it. A pitcher of warm water, steam still rising from it, and a clean towel folded beside it. On the chair, her simple brown dress had been laid out, brushed clean of dust. She opened the door a crack. Eli sat at the table reading a book. He stood when he saw her. "Morning. I hope I did not wake you." "No, thank you." She gestured toward the dress and the water. "You did not have to do all this." Seemed like you could use it after yesterday, he said, moving to the stove. I have coffee and eggs. You should wash up and get dressed. Then we can talk about what is next. When she came out, breakfast was on the table. They ate in a comfortable quiet this time. Been doing some thinking, Eli said at last. You need work, and I need help. If you are willing, I can offer you a job. What kind of job? She asked. Mostly housework. Cooking, cleaning. I am no good at it. I could also use a hand with the lighter ranch work. What would you pay? Room and board plus $30 a month. It is honest work. $30. In Philadelphia, she made $8 a month. This was a fortune. Why? She asked. Why offer this to a stranger? Eli took a moment. Because I know what it is like to need a second chance. And I can see you are a worker, no matter what that man Harlan said. You know nothing about me. I know you traveled 1,000 miles on a promise. I know you did not crumble when it broke. You went looking for work. And I know you are asking questions instead of just taking the offer, which means you have good sense. He looked her right in the eye. That is enough for me. Something tight in her chest finally let go. I will work hard, she said. I believe you will, Eli replied, standing up. We can try it for a month. If it is not working out, we will figure something else out. That is fair. He nodded, and as he turned to wash the dishes, Clara rose and picked up a towel to help. When the dishes were done, Eli said, I will show you around the place. Outside, the morning air was sharp and clean. He walked with a steady pace, pointing out the barn, the well, and the garden plot, which was mostly weeds. The chickens are yours to manage if you want, he said, stopping at the coop. I gather eggs when I think of it, but they need better tending. She saw a dozen hens scratching in the dirt. She remembered helping her mother with chickens as a girl, the feel of a warm egg in her hand. I can do this, she said. They moved to the garden. Eli looked almost embarrassed at the struggling plants. I know it is a mess, he said. I am better with cattle than vegetables. It just needs some work, she replied. Water and weeding. And for the first time since she had stepped off that train, Clara felt a sense of possibility. In a small garden, tomato plants were wilting. Clara knelt in the dry soil. These can be saved, she declared. His voice held a note of hope when he agreed. The barn was just as tidy as the cabin, smelling of hay and leather with every tool in its proper place. You keep everything in order, she remarked. Disorder makes me feel like things are slipping away, he said plainly. Clara understood that feeling perfectly. Inside, Eli handed her a written list of chores: cooking, mending, the garden. It was a substantial job, but it was fair. He would work the ranch and the fences. She would run the household. It was a new beginning. I'm willing to help. She looked him square in the eye. I meant what I said. I will work hard for my keep. He nodded slowly. I believe you. He gave her the folded list. For today, why not just get your bearings, learn where things are? We can start for real tomorrow. But Clara had lost too many years waiting for permission. I would rather start now, if you do not mind. That garden needs water, and I need to learn about those chickens. A look of respect crossed Eli's face. All right, then. The well is out back, buckets are in the barn. With that, he went to check his cattle, leaving her to it. Clara got to work with a deep sense of gratitude. The hard work felt right. She hauled water until her arms burned, carefully tending to the thirsty plants. The chickens eyed her with suspicion, but her soft voice and scattered feed won them over soon enough. By noon, she had made a real dent in the garden's needs and gathered a basket of a dozen eggs still warm. She brought them inside and found Eli at the table fixing some leather tack. He looked up and his eyes widened at the eggs. You found them all. They usually hide half of them. I checked in the corners. And under the nesting box where one has been sneaking off to. Smart. He put down his leatherwork. Are you hungry? We have bread and cheese. They shared a simple meal in comfortable silence. Afterward, Clara insisted on mending a pile of clothes she had seen. Eli tried to object, saying she had done plenty for one day. But she was already threading a needle, so he just shook his head and went back to his work. The afternoon slipped by in a quiet rhythm of shared labor. Clara patched 3 shirts and 2 pairs of work pants while Eli cleaned and repaired his leather gear. Outside, the wind began to howl, and dark clouds gathered on the horizon. "A storm is coming," Eli said, looking out the window. "It might be a bad one." Clara had already noticed the cattle acting restless and the chickens huddling quietly in their coop. "Should we do anything?" "No, everything is tied down. We just have to ride it out." He stood and stretched. "I will bring in some extra firewood, though. These storms can last all night." The sky had turned a sickly green by the time he finished. They worked together to shutter the windows just as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, hitting the roof like thrown pebbles. The storm hit with a terrible fury. The rain came down in sheets, and thunder rattled the little cabin. Lightning bleached the world white every few seconds. Clara had seen storms back east, but nothing with this kind of raw power. Eli lit the lamps and started a fire, more for comfort than for heat. They sat at the table listening to the storm's rage. "It is really something, is it not?" Eli said. "Not like city storms. It feels like it is angry at us." He almost smiled. "Out here, the weather does not care one way or another about you." "That is almost worse." They sat in silence again, but questions were stirring in Clara's mind about this quiet man. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked. 4 years. He stared into his coffee. "I bought the place from a fellow who could not make a go of it. Built most of this cabin myself." "Were you always a rancher?" "No." The word was sharp. He softened his tone. "I was a few other things before this. Ranching found me when I needed a fresh start." Clara heard the unspoken warning in his voice. "I understand needing to start over." Eli looked at her then, a real look, and a silent understanding passed between them. Maybe they recognized something in each other. 2 souls running from ghosts they could never quite shake. Eli broke the quiet. "You said you ran your father's place for 8 years. "My mother passed when I was 16, Clara said. "I kept the house until he died 2 years back. After he was gone, there was nothing left. I worked in a factory and saved every penny to pay Harland his travel money." She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Turns out he wanted a woman who already looked like she'd been broken in by the land." "You're better off," Eli said flatly. "I know," she agreed. But the sting of being dismissed in front of that whole town was still fresh. Eli stood and poked at the fire, which didn't need it. "Men like Harland have a picture in their head. If you don't match it, they throw you away instead of seeing what's really there." The bitterness in his voice told Clara everything. "Someone did that to you, didn't they?" He didn't answer right away. He just stood with his back to her as the storm battered the little cabin. "I was engaged once," he said at last, "to a woman I thought I knew. We had our whole future laid out." He turned, his face half hidden in shadow. "Then I made a mistake, trusted the wrong fellow with the money we had saved. Lost just about all of it. She left before I could say a word. Decided I was too big a fool to be worth the risk." He sat back down. "I reckon she was right about one thing. I was a fool, just not in the way she imagined." Clara wanted to tell him trusting someone didn't make him a fool, but her own recent mistake made the words stick in her throat. "So you came out here," she said instead. "That's right. Bought this piece of land nobody wanted, and built a life that was all mine." His eyes met hers. "And I was doing just fine with my own company. Until yesterday. Until I saw you sitting there looking lost. And I remembered what it felt like to need a hand and find none offered. I'm not good at this, but I meant what I said. You can stay as long as you need." The words were plain and honest, and Clara felt a knot in her chest finally come loose. Trust got her into this mess, but a lack of it almost left her sleeping in a ditch. Right then, with the storm howling outside, trust felt like the only real choice left. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. "For everything." Eli nodded. "Get some rest." Morning comes early around here. But a sudden, desperate cry cut straight through the noise of the wind and rain. They both froze. It was a man's voice, raw with pain. Before Clara could even stand, Eli was at the door, pulling it open. A figure was stumbling through the downpour, bent over and clutching his side. "Help!" the man gasped, and his legs gave out. Eli caught him just before he hit the dirt. "Clara, I need light, and towels, and plenty of them." She moved without thinking, grabbing the lamp and a clean stack of towels. The man was young, maybe 25, with blood seeping between his fingers. Together, they wrestled him inside, and Eli kicked the door shut against the storm. "Easy now, son. We've got you," Eli said as they laid him on the table. The man's shirt was soaked with blood and rain, his face a ghostly gray. "What happened to you?" Eli asked, already cutting away the ruined fabric. "Shot," the man choked out. "They said I stole something. I swear I didn't." His eyes, wide with fear, locked onto Clara's. "Please, I didn't take anything." Eli uncovered the wound, a clean bullet hole in the man's side. It was bleeding steady but not pumping, which was the only good news. "Clara, put a pot of water on to boil," Eli commanded, his voice as calm as could be, "and bring me that medical kit from the shelf." She was grateful to have a task. The kit was simple: bandages, some bottles, and a needle and thread. She brought them to Eli and went to the stove. "What's your name?" Eli asked, his hands surprisingly gentle as he checked the wound. "Wade," he hissed in pain. "Wade Slater." "Well, Wade, the bullet went clean through. That's good news. Means I don't have to go digging for it." Eli glanced at the man, whose eyes were starting to glaze over. "You need to stay with me. Can you do that?" Wade's hand shot out and gripped Eli's wrist. "Those men, they'll come looking for me. They can't let me live." "Let me worry about that," Eli said, taking a hot cloth from Clara and beginning to clean the wound. Wade arched his back with a sharp gasp. "Clara, I need you to hold his shoulders down. Keep him still." She moved to the head of the table, pressing down firmly. She could feel him trembling, could smell the fear and the blood. Eli worked fast, his hands steady as he began to stitch the man back together. The only sign of tension was a muscle jumping in his jaw. "You've done this before," she stated quietly. "The war taught me some things," he said, tying off a stitch, "that I wish I could forget." When Eli finally tied off the last stitch and bandaged Wade's torso, Clara's arms were shaking. "Done," Eli said. "Wade, you still here?" A faint "yeah" was the reply. "Good. You can rest soon, but I need to know. What did they say you stole?" Wade's eyes fluttered. "Money? From a land deal. I didn't take it. I just saw something I shouldn't have." His head fell to the side, and he was out. Eli checked his breathing, then looked at Clara. "Help me get him to the floor." They made a pallet of blankets for Wade by the fire. With his breathing finally evening out, Clara looked down at her own blood-stained dress and felt the whole night crash down on her. "Is he going to live?" she asked. "If infection doesn't get him," Eli said, washing his hands. "And if those men don't come back to finish the job. We'll watch him tonight. If he's still with us by sunup, his chances are a whole lot better." Eli dried his hands, his face a mask. "Then we will handle that too." Clara looked from the sleeping stranger to the blood on her own dress, then to Eli, who stood tense by the window. Just 1 day ago, her whole world was in a single bag and her future was in ruins. Now she was hiding a wanted man from 3 others who were hunting him. A part of her knew she should be terrified. But instead she heard her own voice say, "I will take the first watch. You ought to get some rest." Eli turned from the window, pure surprise on his face. "Clara, he has to be watched closely. I can do that. Just wake me when it is your turn." For a moment, they just stared at each other. Clara saw his expression change from surprise to a deep respect. He saw that she had crossed a line, committing herself to this new life. "All right," Eli said at last, "but you wake me if anything changes." His breathing, his color, anything at all. I will. He moved to his bedroll, stretching out but keeping his boots on, ready for anything. Soon his breathing was deep and even. Clara moved the rocking chair close to Wade, where she could watch him breathe. The storm raged outside, but inside the fire cast a steady, gentle glow. She thought about trust. Trusting Harlan's letter had nearly ruined her, but trusting Eli's quiet offer had saved her. Now this man Wade had stumbled into their lives, bringing danger with him, and they had chosen to trust his story too. Maybe that was the real difference in people. Some folks like Harlan only see what you are lacking, but a man like Eli looks at you and sees what you could become. A loud crack of thunder shook the cabin, and Wade stirred in his sleep, mumbling. Without thinking, Clara laid a hand on his shoulder to soothe him. "You are safe," she whispered. "For now, at least, you are safe." Whether that would still be true in the morning, nobody knew. The hours passed slowly. She fought to stay awake, her head nodding and then snapping back up. Wade's breathing stayed steady, and the gray, pale look on his face had started to fade. Around midnight, Eli finally stirred. He looked at her, then over at Wade, before moving quietly to the fire. "You ought to get some rest," he said, his voice low. "I can take the watch now." Clara was bone-tired, too weary to put up a fight. As she stood, the room swayed, and Eli's hand shot out to steady her. "Easy now. You did real good tonight." He gently guided her toward the bedroom. Things always look a little better in the morning. The quiet dark of the room felt like a sanctuary. She fell onto the bed without even taking off her blood-spattered dress, and sleep took her instantly. Her dreams were a rough mix of storms and Harlan's sneering face. But through it all, she could hear Eli's voice promising, "You're safe here." When she finally woke, gray dawn was seeping through the window, and men were shouting in the yard. Clara shot upright, her heart hammering in her chest. The shouting outside was rough and demanding. She scrambled from the bed and hurried into the main room. Eli stood tense as a coiled spring at the window, peeking through a crack in the shutters. Wade was awake, propped near the fireplace and looking pale as a ghost. "3 riders," Eli said without turning. "They're armed, and they're demanding we come out." Clara's breath caught in her throat. Eli moved toward the door. "Stay back from the windows," he ordered. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. "Talk to 'em. See what they want." His jaw was set like stone. "And make sure they don't get it." He slipped out onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind him. Clara rushed to the window. 3 grim-faced, rain-soaked men sat on their horses. The one in the center was older, with a thick gray beard and a rifle laid across his saddle. "Morning," Eli called out, his voice steady. "Something I can help you with?" The bearded man leaned forward, his eyes cold. "We're tracking a fugitive. Shot him yesterday evening and followed his blood trail straight here." He described the man wounded in the side. "And he's carrying something that ain't his." Eli stood perfectly still, looking as relaxed as if he were just passing the time of day. "Can't say that I have," Eli said. "Storm might have washed your trail away." The man didn't look convinced. "You mind if we look around?" "I mind very much," Eli said plainly. "This is private property. You want to search my land, you bring the sheriff with a warrant." One of the younger men laughed, a mean sound. "Sheriff's a 3-day ride from here, friend." The bearded man's gaze settled on the cabin. "You live here alone? Saw a woman's boot prints in the mud." He showed a row of tobacco-stained teeth. "Got a wife in there?" The question hung in the air like a threat. "I've got someone under my protection," Eli said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The scarred man spat near Eli's boot. "That what you're calling it? Protection?" Eli's hands clenched, but his voice was steady as a rock. "You've said your piece. Time for y'all to ride on." The man with the beard let his hand fall to his pistol. "We'll move on when we're good and ready." He was not drawing, but the message was clear as day. Now this can be easy, or it can be hard. You let us look around, and we'll leave you be. or you make us come back with more men and we'll burn this place down to the dirt." Clara saw Eli standing tall, doing the math in his head. 1 man against 3. The odds were not in his favor. But she knew right then and there he'd die on that porch before he let them inside. That is when she made her choice. She stepped right out onto that porch, ignoring Wade's weak protest. The eyes of all 3 men snapped to her. They took in her rumpled dress and the blood she had not had a chance to wash off. And she saw the ugly thoughts forming in their minds. "There is nobody here," she said, her voice shaking just a little. "My husband and I turned in early on account of the storm." The word husband hung in the air. The bearded man's eyebrow twitched. He looked from Eli to Clara, sizing them up all over again. "Your husband," he said, slow and deliberate. "That is right." Clara stepped up right next to Eli, their shoulders almost touching. She could feel him wanting to shove her back inside to safety, but she did not budge. "We are newlyweds, just trying to start a life. We do not want any trouble." Eli glanced at her, and in that one look, a whole conversation passed between them. Surprise, thanks, and the weight of the lie she had just told. Then he faced the men, his voice different now, full of a new kind of steel. "Like my wife said, we ain't seen your man. The storm kept us indoors all night." The bearded man chewed on that for a long moment. Finally, he leaned back in his saddle, his hand moving away from his gun. "Newlyweds, huh? Well, ain't that sweet?" His tone was anything but. "Just some friendly advice. Life out here is hard enough without hiding criminals. You help a wanted man, you become one. Same goes for his wife." "We will keep that in mind," Eli said, his voice flat. The bearded man pulled on his reins. "Y'all do that, 'cause if we find out you've been lying, we will be back, and we won't be asking next time." He turned his horse, and the other 2 followed, riding away slow and sure of themselves. But Clara saw the scarred man keep looking back and the 3rd fella studying the cabin like he was memorizing it for later. They watched until the riders were gone over the hill. Only then did Eli let out a breath and gently take her elbow. "Inside," he said quietly. "Now." Once the door was bolted, he leaned against it, his eyes shut. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I have ever seen," he finally said, looking right at her. "I can't decide which." "They were going to force their way in," Clara whispered, her hand starting to tremble now that it was over. "The lie. It just came out." "The lie worked," Eli said, moving to check on Wade. "But now they think we're married, and that is going to cause a whole mess of other problems." "What kind of problems?" "The kind where this whole territory finds out we're living under the same roof, unmarried. The kind that ruins what's left of your good name," he said, checking Wade's bandages. "And the kind where those men come back for proof we lied, and find exactly who they're looking for." Wade coughed, his eyes fluttering open. "I am sorry, I should go." "You are not going anywhere like that," Eli said firmly. "You'd be dead before sundown." "But they will be back." "Let me worry about them," Eli said, standing up. "Right now, we need a plan." Clara's mind was already working. "We stick to the story," she said, moving to the window beside him. "We tell everyone we got married quiet-like. It happens all the time out here. It explains why I am here, and it gives us a reason to protect each other. A married couple has rights." Eli turned to look her square in the eye, his face a stone mask. "Do you really know what you are asking? If we say we are married, we have to live it out in the open. Folks will be watching us, expecting us to act a certain way. I understand. And if those fellas find Wade or the truth gets out, we are both in it deep for hiding him. They will not see you as some innocent lady who got caught up in my mess. They will see you as my partner in crime. I know that too." Clara held his gaze without flinching. "But what other choice do we have? Hand Wade over to men who will put a bullet in him? Or send me back to town so Harlan can watch me fail?" Eli's jaw tightened as he thought it over. "I do not owe you a thing," he said at last. "You could walk away from this right now." You would be clear of it. Clara just shook her head. I am not walking away from the only person who has shown me any kindness out here. If we are doing this, we are doing it right. A look passed over Eli's face, like a wall crumbling down. All right then. We got married last week. A quiet affair, just the two of us. What is our story for how we met? The truth, more or less. I was in a bind, and you offered to help. We found we got along and decided not to waste any time. He almost cracked a smile. Sounds about right, except for the wedding part. They stood there in the dim morning light, the lies settling around them like a heavy blanket. It was a shield, but it was also a cage. From the floor, Wade let out a weak cough. I truly am sorry about all this. Save your breath. Eli knelt beside him to check the bandages. He looked at Clara. Can you make some broth? Something easy on the stomach? Yes. She was thankful for a simple job to do. As she worked at the stove, Eli changed Wade's dressings with a steady hand, his voice low as he asked about the men who had shot him. The one with the beard, that is Cyrus Fletcher, Wade said through gritted teeth. He runs every crooked game in the Northern Territory. He is behind a big land deal. What kind of deal? He buys up homesteads for next to nothing from folks who are struggling. Sometimes he just runs them off their land. Then he sells it all to the railroad for a fortune. Eli's hands stopped their work. That is not against the law. Not if he does it legally. But he is faking papers and threatening people. I saw proof. That is why they shot me. Where are the papers now? Wade looked away. I do not have them. I gave them to someone who could expose Fletcher for the snake he is. Who? I cannot say. Fletcher would kill them too. He thinks I still have the proof, and as long as he believes that, my friend is safe. Clara brought a cup of broth. Drink this. Wade took it with a shaky hand. How long before you can ride? Eli asked him. Maybe a week, Wade answered. If this wound does not go bad, I know the trouble I am causing. If you want me gone, I will leave tonight. You would not make it to sunrise, Eli said, standing up. You will stay until you are healed. But we have to be smart. Those men are watching. If they see anything out of the ordinary, they will be back. Wade has to stay hidden, Clara added, and we need to go about our business like nothing is wrong. Like newlyweds. Eli nodded, taking the coffee she offered. I will handle the chores outside. You take care of the house. We just act like a new couple starting out. And if Fletcher comes back, we stick to our story. We are married and we have not seen anyone. But I need to go to town today, get supplies, and let folks see us together. It will make the story stick. Clara's heart sank. You want to go back there, where Harlan is? It is the only way, he said gently but firmly. People need to see you are settled. She knew he was right. The thought of facing those people again was awful, but what choice did she have? When do we go, she asked. After we eat. We need to look presentable. Happy, even. Can you do that? I can do whatever it takes to keep us safe. And she meant every word. After a quick breakfast, Clara went to change into her best dress, a dark blue wool. She pinned her hair and looked at her tired face in the small mirror. She noticed her bare ring finger. A married woman would have a ring, but maybe they were too poor or got married too fast. That little detail actually made their story stronger. When she came out, Eli had also changed into a clean shirt and pants. He had shaved and combed his hair, and for a moment he looked almost handsome. Ready? He asked. As I will ever be. They hitched the wagon and started the ride to town. The sun was finally breaking through the clouds. After a long silence, Eli spoke. When we get there, let me do the talking, but you need to act like you are comfortable with me. He cleared his throat. People will be looking for any sign that we are lying. How close do I need to be? Close enough so they believe we are married. He glanced over at her. I will not put my hands on you without your say-so, but in public, I might have to. I understand. You can take my arm or whatever else a husband might do. And call me Eli, not Mr. Mercer. Try to smile when you look at me. She looked at his serious face. That part will not be hard at all. The promise of his quiet strength was the only thing she had to hold on to, and right now it felt like enough. "You saved my life," she said softly. "I am glad you were there." Eli's grip on the reins tightened, but he did not say a word. As they rode into town, Clara felt her heart start to hammer in her chest. They passed the hotel that had turned her away, the cattle yards where she had wept, and the store where Harlan worked. Folks on the street stopped and stared, their whispers following the wagon. Clara sat up straight and tall, chin high, trying to look like she belonged. Eli pulled the wagon up in front of the main general store, not Harlan's. He climbed down and came around to lift her to the ground. His hands were firm on her waist, and they stayed there just a second too long. "Stay close," he murmured. "And remember, you are mine now. No one can touch you." The words sent a strange warmth through her. It should have felt wrong, but it did not. She took his arm, and they walked into the store together. The clerk looked up, his face a picture of surprise. "Eli Mercer." "Eli, did not figure on seeing you in town 2 days in a row." "Had a good reason to come back," Eli said, his voice loud enough for the whole store to hear. "This here's my wife, Clara. We got hitched last week." You could have heard a pin drop. Every single person in that store just froze and stared. The clerk found his voice first, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, I will be. Congratulations to you both." But his eyes darted between them, doing the math. "Last week, you say? That was mighty quick." "When you know," Eli said, his voice easy but firm. "No sense in waiting when you find the right one." A woman in a faded dress, one Clara recognized from the train platform, stepped forward. "But I thought you came here for Harlan Crow. Everyone was saying you were his mail-order bride." Clara felt their eyes on her, heavy with judgment. She opened her mouth to speak, but Eli cut in first. "She answered his advertisement, that is true," he said, a hard edge to his voice now. "But after she met the man, she realized he was not for her. Lucky for me, I was there, and we found out we suited each other just fine." "More in common, you say?" The woman's voice was dripping with suspicion. "You really just up and married her? Without giving her a moment to catch her breath, learn her way around, or think about what she was getting into?" "I gave her a choice, plain and simple." Eli looked that woman dead in the eye, same as any decent man would. She could have said no, but she did not. That's when Clara found her voice, surprised at how steady it sounded. "Mr. Eli offered me honest work and fair treatment. That was a sight more than I found anywhere else in this town." She looked around the general store, meeting every curious stare. "And yes, we married in a hurry. But that is our business and nobody else's." The quiet that followed felt different. The shock was gone, replaced by folks sizing her up. Clara could feel them trying to figure her out. Was she a victim or a schemer? Just a naive girl or something else entirely? The store clerk cleared his throat. "Well, like I said, congratulations. Now, what can I get for y'all today?" Eli pulled a list from his pocket and things got back to normal. They bought sugar, flour, coffee, and lamp oil. The clerk filled the order, but Clara saw him watching them from the corner of his eye. He was trying to listen in on their conversation. While Eli checked the supplies, Clara walked over to the fabrics, pretending to be interested. The thin woman, Martha, followed her. "I am Martha Connolly," she said in a low voice. "I do not mean to be nosy, but I have to ask. Are you here because you want to be?" Clara turned right around to face her. She knew exactly what the woman was really asking. "Mr. Eli has been a perfect gentleman. He helped me out of a bad spot and gave me a fresh start. I took it." Martha's eyes were sharp. "Harlan has been telling folks you are not cut out for this kind of life." "Too soft," he said. "Harlan made up his mind about me before I even had a chance to prove him wrong. Mr. Eli is giving me that chance. I am a whole lot tougher than most people think." "You will need to be," Martha said, her voice even quieter now. "Living way out there with a man, even your husband, folks are going to talk. And if anything goes wrong, they will point the finger straight at you. Then I will just have to make sure there is nothing for them to point at." Martha looked at her for a long, hard second, then gave a slow nod. "You have got some backbone." That is good. You will need it. Not everyone in this town is against you, you know. Some of us remember what it feels like to be the new person. Those words were like a small flame of hope in Clara's chest. She and Martha went back to the counter where Eli was paying the bill. He took the fabric from Clara and added it to their pile of supplies. He paid in cash from a worn leather wallet. Then he loaded up the wagon while Clara waited, feeling all the eyes on her from windows and doorways. As they got back in the wagon, a man stepped out of a store down the street. It was Harlan Crow. He stopped in his tracks when he saw them, his face turning hard. "Eli Mercer," he hollered across the street. "Heard a mighty interesting rumor you got yourself hitched." Eli got Clara settled in her seat before he turned to face Harlan. "It is not a rumor, it is a fact." Harlan's eyes landed on Clara, and he recognized her in an instant. "Well, now you sure work fast. Has it been 3 days since you got here?" "2," Eli said, his voice flat. "And like I told everybody else, when you know, you know." "But do you really know?" Harlan came closer, looking all too casual. "I wrote back and forth with Miss Whitmore for weeks. I read all about her fancy big city manners and how she does not know the first thing about life out here. I'm just wondering what you saw in her that I did not." Clara felt her face get hot with shame and anger. But before she could say a word, Eli stepped between her and Harlan. "I saw a woman who is not afraid of hard work. A woman who is honest about what she can and cannot do." He let that sink in. "Maybe you were just looking for something different. That is your business. But do not you stand here and question my choices just because yours did not pan out. This woman," Clara cut in, her voice sharp as a tack, "is sitting right here. And she has managed to get through 2 days of hard work just fine, which is more of a chance than you ever gave her." Harlan looked surprised she had spoken up. He clearly thought she would just sit there quietly. "2 days is not 2 years. You will see. I was right about you." "Or maybe you will see you were wrong," Clara shot back, holding his gaze. "Either way, it is not your concern anymore. I am Eli's wife now, not your mail-order bride that you sent back." The word wife felt strange, but she said it with all the strength she could find. Harlan just sort of deflated. "Well then, congratulations to the both of you," he said, but it sounded more like a curse. He walked off, and Eli's hand rested on her shoulder for just a second. "That went about as well as I figured," Eli said quietly. "You probably made an enemy for life, though." "I already had one. At least now he knows I do not scare easy." Eli picked up the reins, but another voice called out, "Mercer, hold on a minute." A tall man with a silver star on his vest was walking toward them. It was the sheriff. Clara's heart dropped. This was either really good or really bad. The sheriff stopped by the wagon, his face hard to read. "Heard you got married, Eli. Wanted to say congratulations." "Thank you, Sheriff Coleman," Eli said respectfully. "This is my wife, Clara." "Ma'am." The sheriff tipped his hat. "I also wanted to ask if you have seen anything strange out at your place. Cyrus Fletcher and his boys came through yesterday. They are hunting a fugitive who they claim stole from them." Clara held her breath, trying to look calm. Beside her, Eli did not flinch. "Fletcher did stop by this morning," Eli said, looking right at the sheriff. "Said he was looking for a young fellow with light hair who was hurt. I told him I have not seen anyone like that. And have you?" "No, sir. That storm had us cooped up all evening. If somebody passed by, we would not have seen them." The sheriff studied them both for a long time, his face a stone wall. Clara felt like he was judging every word they said. At last, he gave a slow nod. "Fletcher is a tough customer. He has a lot of power in the Northern Territory, but not all of it is clean." The sheriff rested his hand on the wagon, his voice getting low. "If you happen to see the man he is hunting, you come to me first. Do not try to be a hero, and do not let Fletcher bully you into a bad decision. Do you understand?" Eli answered right away. "Understood." His voice was careful, not agreeing, but not arguing either. "Good." Coleman stepped away. "Congratulations on getting married. Clara, welcome. If you need help, my door is always open." He turned and left them alone in the wagon. The air felt thick with what was not said. Eli waited until the sheriff was gone. He knows something is not right. He might not know what, but he can feel it. Eli nudged the horses on, leaving town. Coleman is a good man, but he is smart. He will not go looking for trouble, but if it finds him, he will deal with it. We have to be very careful. The wagon creaked down the dirt road as the town disappeared behind them. Clara thought about the people they met. Martha's guarded welcome, Harlan's bitter words, Coleman's sharp eyes. Every conversation was like walking on a wire. "You did good back there," Eli said after a bit. "You did not let them see you were scared. I was shaking the whole time. I could not tell." He looked at her with something like respect. "You have more grit than I thought, Clara Whitmore." "It is Clara Mercer now," she said automatically. "At least for everyone else." The words settled between them, a reminder of the story they had to live. Eli's hands tightened on the reins. "For everyone else," he agreed softly. Back at the cabin, Wade was resting by the fireplace. He looked a little better. He sat up when they came in, relief washing over his face. "How did it go?" "It went as well as we could hope." Eli started bringing in the supplies. "We are married as far as the town knows." The sheriff asked some questions, but he let it go. "Everyone knows Fletcher is hunting a man. If Fletcher comes here, we just tell our story and pray he has no proof. You are staying hidden. No chances, Wade. No mistakes." Clara gently peeled back the bandage to look at his wound. The stitches were holding, but the skin all around them was an angry red. "This needs a good cleaning," she said softly. "And you have got to eat more. Your body cannot heal itself on an empty stomach." Wade tried for a weak smile, his voice thin from exhaustion. "Never had a nurse so dedicated." "I am not a nurse," Clara said, replacing the dressing. "I am just a woman who does not want you dying in our cabin. Now you get some real rest." Later that evening, after Wade had managed some soup and fallen into a deep sleep, Clara and Eli sat at the table. The last of the daylight filtered through the window. "What happens when he is well enough to leave?" Clara finally asked. "He goes north, just like he planned," Eli said, staring into his coffee cup. "He will get far away from Fletcher and start over someplace new. And we just go back to our lives? As a married couple? That story is not going to disappear just because he does." "No," Eli said, looking up to meet her eyes. "It is not. I reckon we are committed now." The words from a wedding, for better or worse, seemed to hang in the air between them. Clara thought about the kind of marriage she had hoped for, a true partnership, maybe even affection, given time. Instead, she had a business deal born out of danger, held together by lies told to violent men. "For how long?" she asked. "How long do we have to keep up this act?" "As long as we have to. Could be months, could be years," Eli answered, his voice matter-of-fact. "Towns like this have long memories. If we suddenly say we are separating after just a month, it will stir up the exact kind of trouble we have been trying to avoid. So, we are trapped." "We are committed," he corrected her gently, "to a choice we both made. It is not perfect, but we can survive it. We work well together, Clara." "What if one of us wants to leave?" she asked. "Or wants something different, a real marriage?" "Then we will figure it out together," he said. His hand reached across the table, hovering near hers, but not quite touching. "I'm not trying to trap you, Clara. I'm trying to protect both of us." His honesty cut right through her rising panic. "I do not want to go, not yet anyway. I just needed to know I had the choice." "You always have a choice," he promised, pulling his hand back. The next 3 days passed in a careful routine. Eli worked the ranch where he could be seen, while Clara ran the house and looked after Wade's recovery. They played their parts as a newly married couple anytime someone passed by. Slowly, the lie started to feel almost comfortable. Wade was getting stronger every day, but he was still too weak to travel. On the 5th morning, Clara was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard horses, more than one, and they were moving fast. She stood up straight, her hand going to the small knife she kept in her apron. 3 riders appeared over the rise, and her heart dropped. It was Fletcher and his men. This time they did not slow down. They rode right into the yard, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. Eli came out of the barn, his jaw tight. He stood between the riders and Clara. "Fletcher," he said, his voice level, "I did not expect to see you again so soon." "I did not expect to need to come back," Fletcher shot back as he swung down from his horse. "But I have been hearing interesting things. Seems you got married right about the time our fugitive disappeared. That is mighty convenient timing, would you not say? My personal life is not your concern." "It is my concern when it gives you a reason to lie to me." Fletcher stepped closer, his eyes hard. "See, I have been thinking about that morning, about how your wife just appeared right when my questions got uncomfortable." Clara made herself walk toward them, trying to look calm even though terror was crawling up her spine. "We sent you away because you were threatening us on our own property. We have nothing to hide," she added, and the lie came a little easier this time. "Too late for that," the scarred man spoke up, his voice like gravel. "We found blood in the mud near your barn. Fresh blood. From about 5 days ago." Clara felt the ground shift under her feet. Eli went completely still beside her. "Could be from anything," Eli said. "This was not chicken blood." Fletcher pulled a piece of cloth from his pocket, dark with dried blood. "This was near it. Looks like it came from a man's shirt. Nice fabric, too." Clara recognized it right away. It was a piece of Wade's shirt. "I do not know what that is," Eli said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "I think you do." Fletcher stepped closer, getting right in Eli's personal space. "I think Wade Slater showed up here wounded, and you took him in. I think he is hiding in that cabin right now." "You are welcome to search," Eli said, and Clara's blood ran cold. Wade was inside with nowhere to run. "But you will not find anything." Fletcher studied them both for a long moment. Then a cold smile touched his lips. "I believe he is not here now. But he was here. And that means you helped him, which makes you accomplices. To theft and to murder." "Murder?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "You said he stole from you." "He stole, and then he killed the man I sent to get it back. Shot him in cold blood," Fletcher said, his eyes never leaving Eli's face. "So when we find Slater, and we will, everyone who helped him is going to hang right alongside him. Leave my land before I call the sheriff on you for harassment. Call him if you want. Sheriff Coleman knows I am here." Fletcher looked at his men. "Search that barn. If you find anything, clothes, food, any sign someone has been hiding, bring it to me." The 2 men walked toward the barn. Clara's heart pounded. There was nothing in there to prove Wade was here, but she had left extra blankets and medicine outside to be washed. Little things that could tell a big story. She looked at Eli, trying to ask with her eyes what they should do. Fight? Run? He just stood there, his hands loose, his gaze fixed on Fletcher. The men came out of the barn a few minutes later. One held up a bundle of blankets. "We found these under a tarp. They are damp and there is fresh blood on them." Fletcher took the blankets and looked at Eli with a grin. "You still want to say you have not seen anyone?" Eli did not flinch, but Clara saw a change in his eyes. It was the look of a man who was done running. "Those blankets are from a calf I delivered 3 nights ago," he said, his voice steady. "It was a hard birth and there was a lot of blood." "A calf?" Fletcher's smile grew wider. "That is mighty convenient. It is the truth. You can go see for yourself. There is a new calf in there. Both it and its mother are fine because I did my job, which made a mess." The scarred man looked at Fletcher. "He is right. There is a cow and calf in there." Fletcher's smile faded a little. "And that piece of shirt we found?" "The storm could have blown that in from anywhere," Eli said calmly. "Look, I get that you are looking for someone, but blaming innocent folks because of bloody blankets from ranch work is not helping you. The wrong side of the law?" Fletcher laughed, but it was a cold sound. "That is funny, coming from a man hiding a killer. I am hiding my wife and my animals. That is all. Eli took a step forward. Fletcher's hand went to his gun. "You have searched my barn and questioned me. You have found nothing but proof that I run a ranch. Now I am asking you one last time, nicely. Leave my property." The air grew heavy, thick with the promise of violence. Just then, a voice called from the road. "Is everything all right here?" They all turned to see Sheriff Coleman on his horse. He sat casually, but his eyes missed nothing. Fletcher's face soured. "Sheriff, I was just checking on that fugitive. Found some things that make me think the Mercers know more than they are saying." Coleman got down from his horse slowly. His presence changed everything. "Is that so? What did you find?" "Bloody blankets in the barn. A piece of a man's shirt nearby." Fletcher showed him the items. Coleman looked at the blankets, then at Eli. "Do you have an explanation for this?" "A difficult calving 3 nights ago." The sheriff nodded. "I will take your word for it." He handed the blankets back. "As for the cloth, a storm can carry anything. This does not prove a thing, except that ranching is dirty business." "Sheriff, with all due respect, Fletcher, you have been bothering these people with nothing but suspicion." Coleman's voice turned hard. "I let you search for your man because justice is important, but I will not let you harass my people. I can't let you strong-arm decent people without a lick of proof. Do you hear me?" Fletcher's face went hard. "That man killed one of mine. I have every right. You have the right to a legal pursuit. You do not have the right to threaten folks or search their home without cause." Coleman stood relaxed, but his message was pure iron. "Unless you have real evidence for a real court, I suggest you and your men ride on." The air grew tight. Clara watched Fletcher, saw him weighing his choices. He could push his luck, or he could back down and keep his freedom. At last, Fletcher gave a false smile. "Of course, Sheriff. Just doing right by my fallen man." He swung up on his horse, his men right behind him. Before he left, he stared down at Eli and Clara. "I will find Slater, and when I do, I will remember who helped him." They galloped off, leaving a cloud of dust and fear. Clara felt her legs tremble, and Eli's hand caught her arm to steady her. Coleman watched them disappear, then turned back. "You want to tell me what is really happening here?" Eli and Clara shared a look. This was the moment for truth, or something close to it. "A man came during the storm," Eli said, choosing his words with care. "He was hurt bad, and he swore he was innocent. We gave him a bed for the night. He was gone by morning." Coleman's eyes narrowed. "So, you did see Slater?" "We saw a man who called himself Wade. We did not ask for papers." "And you helped him?" "He was bleeding to death," Clara said, her voice stronger than she felt. "We could not just turn him out in the rain. That does not make us outlaws, it just makes us human." Coleman looked them over for a long moment. "Being decent and following the law are not always the same thing, Mrs. Mercer. Helping a fugitive makes you an accessory." "We understand that," Eli said. "But Fletcher's justice is a bullet, not a trial. Turning Wade over to him would have been a death sentence." "Maybe so." Coleman walked to his horse. "But you need to listen. Fletcher will not stop looking. He has men and money, and I cannot shut him down for good. If that Wade fellow is still near here, you get him gone, far gone. Because next time Fletcher shows up, I might not be here to stop him." "We thank you, Sheriff," Clara said. "I did not do it for y'all. I did it because men like Fletcher can't be allowed to make their own law." He climbed into his saddle. "But my help only goes so far. You are playing a dangerous game. Be sure you know the stakes." He rode off, leaving them in a heavy silence. Clara turned to Eli, the tension plain on his face. "Wade has to leave," she said softly. "Tonight." "I agree." Eli headed for the cabin. "Let us see if he can even ride." Inside, Wade was awake by the window, pale as a ghost. He had heard everything. "I am sorry," he said right away. "I never meant to bring this trouble to you." "You would be dead if you had left," Eli said, checking his bandages. "But the sheriff is right. You need to go. Can you ride?" Wade stood up slow, pain flashing in his eyes, but he stayed on his feet. I can manage. Then we will get you ready. Food, water, and supplies. You leave before the sun comes up. Head north, and do not stop in any town Fletcher might have friends in. What about you two? Fletcher will make your life hard. Let us worry about our own business, Clara said, already gathering food. You just worry about staying alive. They spent that evening packing bags with jerky and biscuits and filling water canteens. As the prairie went dark, Eli saddled their steadiest horse in the barn, working by touch alone. He led it to the back of the cabin, out of sight. They ate a quiet meal together, the three of them, a strange little family born of trouble. I will never forget this, Wade said. What y'all did. If I make it, I will find a way to repay you. Just live a good life, Eli told him. That is payment enough. They left Wade in the barn, ready to go. Back in the cabin, the silence felt different, full of shared risk and purpose. What now? Clara asked. Fletcher will be watching us. We do what we have been doing, Eli said, his voice tired. We work this ranch, we act like a married couple, and we give him nothing. But do men like Fletcher ever give up? No. The word was heavy. But sometimes they find bigger trouble, or they just decide we are not worth the effort. Clara thought about a life spent looking over her shoulder. It should have scared her, but it did not. I am glad I am here, she said suddenly. I know it sounds crazy, but I am. Eli looked at her then, truly looked at her. I am glad you are here too. The last few days having someone to share this with. It has been good. The words hung between them, simple and honest. She thought about the marriage she had planned with Heron. All security and no feeling. This thing with Eli was the exact opposite, and it felt more real than anything she had ever known. What happens after Wade is gone? She asked. Do we just keep on like this? I suppose that is up to you, Eli said, leaning forward. We can keep up the act for the neighbors, or we can try to make something real from all this. I am open to either path. Her heart beat a little faster. The real question was plain. Did she want a real marriage, or just the protection of one? I want something real, she said quietly. I do not want to spend a year pretending. It feels wrong. Wrong how? Because I like you. Because we work good together. When Fletcher came with his men, my first thought was about keeping you safe. She looked him in the eye, trying to be brave. I did not come here expecting kindness, but I think I'm finding it. The hardness in Eli's face seemed to melt away. I feel the same way. Having you here has reminded me what it is like to have a partner. Someone who stands with you when things get tough instead of running. So what do? We go slow. We give this time to see what it is. He reached out and put his hand over hers. But maybe we can stop pretending this is just a deal. Maybe it is becoming something more. Clara felt the rough skin of his palm. Something more, she agreed. For a moment, a feeling of rightness settled in her chest. It was not peace, not yet. But it was close. Before the sun came up, they woke Wade. The night was cold and quiet, with a sky full of stars. Wade got on the horse, his face tight with pain but full of resolve. Head north, Eli told him, and ride as fast as you can. We will make it through. Just don't you trust anyone until you are a long way from Fletcher's land. I will not. Wade looked down at them, his face full of thanks and regret. Thank you both. For everything. Go, Clara said softly, and be safe. They watched him ride off into the dark until he was just a speck on the prairie. They stood there in the cold morning with Eli's arm around Clara's shoulders. The sun started to rise, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold. It was beautiful and dangerous, just like this new life she was starting. We ought to go inside, Eli said. Get some coffee started. Clara just wanted to stay there a moment longer. I want to remember this. We did a good thing. No matter what Fletcher says or what happens next. We helped someone who needed it. That has got to count for something. It counts for a whole lot. Eli's arm tightened around her. Come on. Let us go face whatever is coming together. They walked back to the cabin, hand in hand. The future was uncertain and maybe even dangerous, but it was also full of promise, partnership, and maybe, just maybe, something that felt a lot like love. Not the safe life she had imagined, but something real. After Wade rode out, a tense quiet settled on the ranch. Fletcher's hired guns were seen nosing around town, but they kept their distance from our land. It seemed Sheriff Coleman's warning had given us some space to breathe. Eli and I just kept on with our chores, trying to act like everything was normal. Slowly, things in town started to change. Folks who used to look right through us began to nod hello. Then, on the 10th day, Sheriff Coleman rode up. My heart jumped into my throat, fearing the worst about Wade or Fletcher. But the sheriff just took the coffee Eli offered and sat down on the porch steps, calm as could be. "Just checking on y'all," he said. "Making sure you haven't had any more trouble from Fletcher." Eli answered cautiously. "Not a peep since you sent him packing." "Good," Coleman said, taking a sip. "That's real good." "Truth is," the sheriff continued, "Fletcher's got bigger fish to fry now. Seems somebody sent the territorial governor a whole mess of papers about his crooked land deals. We're talking forgery, threats, fraud. The kind of thing that gets federal marshals interested." My breath caught in my throat. It was Wade's proof. Someone had made sure it got to the right hands. "Is that a fact?" Eli said, his voice flat as a skillet. "It surely is. And Fletcher knows when the federals start poking around, he better be covering his own tracks, not chasing folks across the territory." The sheriff gave a grim little smile. He stood up, settling his hat. "Anyhow, I reckon you'll be left alone now. If you get word to Wade Slater, you can tell him the coast should be clear for him to come on home once all this shakes out." "If we hear from him, we'll be sure to pass that along," Eli said smoothly. When the sheriff was gone, we just stood there letting the news sink in. Wade was safe. Fletcher was getting what he deserved. The dark cloud over us was finally gone. "We did it," I whispered. "We surely did." Eli pulled me in, his arm wrapping around my waist, and I leaned right into him. "There were moments I wasn't so sure," he admitted. "I thought about the fear, the constant looking over my shoulder, but I also thought about the trust we had built. "I need to tell you something," I said, turning to him. "When I came out here, I was just looking for a safe place to land. But what I found with you, it's not just safe. It's real." His face softened, and he cupped my cheek. "When you got off that train, you looked a little lost. But you weren't. You were just in the wrong place. This is where you belong, Clara. With me." He rested his forehead against mine. "If you'll have me for real." My answer was a kiss. When we finally came up for air, a real, happy laugh bubbled out of me. "What's so funny?" Eli asked, a smile in his voice. "I came here to marry a stranger and start over," I said. "And I did exactly that, just not how I planned." I took his hand. "But I wouldn't change a single thing. The danger, the lies. It all led us right here." Later that afternoon, we rode into town together. I wanted to walk down that main street next to my husband, my real husband. We stopped at the general store, and the clerk greeted us like old friends. Then, as we passed Harlan's Mercantile, he was standing in the doorway. Our eyes met for a second. I saw him take in the easy way Eli and I stood together, the confidence I now had. He saw exactly what he'd thrown away. I gave him a polite, distant smile and kept on walking. I had nothing left to prove to him. On the ride home, Eli was awful quiet. "Something on your mind?" I asked. "Just thinking how much can change in 10 days, he said, looking at me with so much warmth. 10 days ago, I figured I'd be alone for good. Thought I'd had my one shot at a partner and lost it, and now I have you. Someone who stands right by my side when trouble comes calling. Someone who chooses to stay when running would be a whole lot easier." His voice was thick with feeling. "I don't know what I did to deserve a second chance like this." but I'm thankful for it every single day. Tears welled up in my eyes. I'm the one who got the second chance, I said. You gave me a place to belong when I had nothing. You saved me, Eli, in every way that counts. We saved each other, he corrected, his voice gentle. That's what partners do. When we got back to the ranch, the sun was putting on a show, painting the whole sky in shades of orange and red. We stood there watching it, not wanting the moment to end. It felt like we were standing on the doorstep of the life we were choosing to build together. I love you, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I know it's fast, but it's true. I love how you think, how you work, how you treated me with kindness from the very start. Eli turned to me, his hands on my shoulders. I love you too, Clara. Your courage, your grit, the way you just get things done. I thought I knew what love was, but this is so much deeper. He kissed me then, and in that kiss I felt the last little bit of fear and doubt melt away for good. We were home. In that moment, all her uncertainty just melted away. Home wasn't this cabin or the land, it was this man, this partnership they were forging together. That night, they sat at their table and talked late into the evening. They talked about the future, about growing the ranch, and maybe one day having children. For the first time since her father died, Clara felt a deep sense of peace. She was not alone anymore. When she woke the next morning, they were wrapped around each other, as comfortable as if they had been doing so for years. Eli made coffee while she cooked breakfast, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. She looked around the cabin and felt a wave of gratitude for every single choice that had led her to this very spot. What are you thinking about? Eli asked, seeing the look on her face. I'm thinking about that train platform, she said, reaching for his hand. Watching Harlan walk away, I was so sure my life was over. She squeezed his hand. It seems sometimes the worst moments are the ones that lead you to the best ones. That rejection can be a redirection. And what life do you need? He asked softly. This one. Exactly this one, she said. It's harder than what I imagined, but it's more honest. It's ours. They went out to face the day's work together. There were cattle to check and fences to mend, but Clara found joy in the labor. There was a deep satisfaction in building something real with the man she loved. That evening, they stood on the porch and watched another sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and red. Do you ever regret it? She asked him. Taking me in that first day. If you'd left me there, you wouldn't have all this trouble. Eli shook his head without a second thought. Not for a minute. Life without risk is life without reward. I'd rather have you and the dangers that came along with you than have safety and solitude. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. She leaned into his embrace, feeling safe and cherished and right where she was meant to be. I love you, she said, the words feeling new and true every time. I love you too, he replied. They were two souls who had been lost in their own way, and together they had found their way home. Inside the cabin, a lamp burned steadily, casting a warm light. Their home, built from honest work and genuine care, was waiting. Clara took Eli's hand and led him inside, closing the door on the vast night and all the dangers they had overcome. Tomorrow would bring its own set of challenges, but tonight was for being grateful. They had started with nothing but necessity and a lie, and from that they had built something true. As his arms came around her again in the lamplight, she knew it was worth every risk and every fear. This was her life now, chosen and earned, and she would not trade it for anything in the whole wide world. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.